All right, hello everybody and welcome to the THERA-Trainer webinar today about the power of music feedback in rehabilitation. Within the next hour, we will speak about the possibilities and the impact of merging musically expressive performance with physical experience in the field of neurorehabilitation. My name is Fabian Scheffold. I'm working as a project manager in new business development at THERA-Trainer. And this year, I've already played a major role in a project regarding music feedback. Together with the Max Planck spin-off Jimin, we've developed a novel app called THERA-music for exactly that purpose. So what was our motivation behind that project? Our motivation was to increase the motivation of our patients, not only in sports, in rehabilitation, and especially in neurorehabilitation as well. The motivation of the exercising people plays an essential role. And most people or patients will experience the training as more joyful and less hard if they receive any kind of music feedback during the exercise. To get a better understanding of that, I would like to briefly tell you the short story of the discovery behind Jimin. Since our speaker, Tom Fritz, is the founder of Jimin, he can of course tell you the more detailed version. So Tom was traveling to Cameroon and discovered that the Mafa combine physical experience with music making. And so they achieve a very good mood and sometimes even up to euphoria while they're exercising. And the idea of Tom was to translate that into something what people would understand culturally here as well, in a modern form using our modern Western technology. So to say, with Jimin, you can play physical exercise like a music instrument. And that helps people to go on exercising at a point where they would normally stop. And exactly that is the idea behind Jimin, the app we've developed together with Jimin. THERA-music allows users to actively control music while they use cycling devices. And I'd like to quickly share my elevator pitch video with you to give you an idea how THERA-music works. All right, so in our webinar today, our two speakers will share their great knowledge about the power of music and provide you some insights how that technology works, the scientific background, and of course, how music feedback can be applied in clinical practice. So let me quickly introduce you to our two speakers. There's Professor Dr. Thomas Fritz. Welcome, Tom. Tom is a music researcher and a neuroscientist. He's the founder and chief scientific officer at Jimin, and he as well leads the research group for music-evoked brain plasticity at the Max Planck Institute. He's a specialist and for sure a key opinion leader in the field of music feedback during exercising. Welcome, Tom. We are very happy that you're part of that webinar today. And our second speaker, Lydia Schneider. Lydia is a trained psychologist and a licensed psychotherapist, and she's key to understand the connection between music feedback and the psychological outcome with a focus on chronic pain. And that's exactly the topic of the PhD she's currently working at the Max Planck Institute. Welcome, Lydia. Thank you very much for joining us. So quick organizational note from my side before we start. After the presentation of our two speakers, we will have roughly 5 to 10 minutes left to answer all the questions and have a kind of panel discussion. So if you have any question during that webinar, feel free to use the question box and simply type in your question, and we try to answer it later. All right, so I would say I have spoken enough right now because Tom and Lydia, you're the specialist. The stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fabian, for your kind introduction. Yeah, so hello everyone. I can't see you, but I hope you're there and you're listening in. And so, yeah, today I want to present you our work that we've done in this field, which has become quite a hot topic really in the neuroscience of music, because it's become clear in the last years that music can be such a powerful tool when working with patients, and even patients who who don't speak your language, who have lost the capability for articulating themselves after a stroke or so. And so we do think we have here a very, very powerful method, and we are very happy about our collaboration with THERA-Trainer, Medica THERA-Trainer, because now it's really possible to to just order it and have this in the clinic and work with the patients, and it's really, really simple to do. So basically you just have to select the kind of music you want to play interactively, and I don't know, and then you press start and you can play this sequence of songs that people can play interactively. And I'm not sure if that totally came across just now, but how it works is that basically we allow people to create their own soundtrack to this exertion experience that they have. And all these patients, they usually have a really strong exertion experience. If they try to either use the arms and hands or their legs after they've got some kind of event that's hindering them to do so, this is something that's really, really difficult for them, as you all know, of course. But if you can create your soundtrack for this, so which means that if you do a little, the music comes in a little, and you do a little bit more, and the music responds to this and comes in with some additional violence, and then you do even more, and you have something happening, and you do even more, and then the whole drum set is there. And if you can't do the maximum anymore, and you go a little bit down, and the music follows you, and the drum set goes away, and it corresponds exactly in arousal to how much arousal participants invest themselves to move. And we have realized this in our experiments over the last years, that this has an enormous effect, because patients, they very strongly identify with this music, that this is them, and this can do a lot of good things. And I want to show this to you in this little presentation that we have prepared. So yeah, there it is. So these are the two institutes I'm associated with. This is the University of Ghent in Belgium, this modern building on the left side, and on the right side, this is both the little thing in the background and in the foreground. That's part of the Max Planck Institute for Cognitive and Brain Sciences. And this is also a very modern institute with, like 4 brain scanners and a lot of EEG labs, etc. And we do really top-notch research in the work of neurology. And now Fabian told you this story. Weird. So Mr. Fritz, he was going to this music ethnological field study. So you might ask yourself, rightly so, why did he do that if he's working on the Max Planck Institute? And the reason for this was that there are some questions, or there were some questions we could not answer with our expensive machines when it comes to what are the music experiences people have in terms of how pleasant and unpleasant do they perceive the music. And we looked at this in terms of brain circuitry. So what's happening actually in the brain? But one of the things that I was really interested in is, so what are the effects of music irrespective of previous learning? And so I did this with people who had never before listened to these Western music experimental stimuli that I was using. And one of the reasons for this is that when you have a stroke, what's largely destroyed is what you learn during your life, all these synapses. And so if you, and we find again and again, also in Alzheimer's patients, that this capacity for music is there for a long time. So even at the late stages of Alzheimer's, the music can be reactivating. And so what we found out is that there are some aspects of music that seem to work on a very basic level. So even if you don't have this acculturation to something, to another culture and their music, and have all these associations from your previous life, joy, etc., with the music, and also that this can actually be very efficient with patients. And so I will go with you through this presentation. And first, there's a tiny conflict of interest, of course, because I'm one of the co-founders of this Jimin technology that does this music feedback that's also now implemented in the THERA-Trainer. And so before we found this wonderful solution to do this with cycling, we also evaluated this with all kinds of, basically the principle that you can track the movements with no matter what type of technology, be it with sensors or visual or whatnot, and then directly translate the amount of engagement into the arousal, the musical expressivity that's currently audible, so that the music, like a soundtrack, exactly follows your inner experience of how engaged you try to be. So, and of course, with the THERA-Trainer, it's absolutely wonderful, and I can actually sit there. I've tried it out at the, of course, many times, but at the, even in a crowded room when we were at this Rotterdam rehab conference, I mean, I can get to my happy place very fast, very efficiently, but really anyone can. And that's the nice thing about it. So participants, they sit down and they realize, oh, something's playing. Oh, okay. And then, oh, the faster I go, the music changes with what I do. And this correspondence of your activity level and the music activity level is so profound. We even find it in minimal consciousness patients who like to engage with this kind of activity, and in Alzheimer's patients who don't even know who they are. So that's something absolutely striking. And for me, it's also a call for responsibility, because this needs to go out there, and it really works with people. And we have all these experiments I'll show you, but also this anecdotal feedback of these, for example, Parkinson's patients. We start something with Parkinson's now, but who's who have this patient who would never do sports interventions because they had the freezing, but now with this they would go themselves 5-6 times a day to engage in this activity, and they can do it themselves on the Tigo because they just have to go there, select the music, and press start. And what you see here, that's the tracking of the activity level. So here That's just a little bit of music, more music, and now full music, or not actually, there's still a little way to go. And what then the therapists can do, they can adjust the level of what patients are able to do during their intervention dynamically to, you know, to fit this precisely to their maximum what they're able to do. And if it's much less, then it's much less, you know, or if it's higher, you can scale it up. So this is extremely efficient because we know that both music interventions are very, very efficient, or can be, but we also know that physical training is highly efficient, and that this actually systematically enables neuroplasticity. And we also know through which mechanism. It's basically linked to our metabolism, so that a higher nerve growth factor, this BDNF, is available when you are engaging in physical exercise. And therefore, also it has been shown to be beneficial after stroke, this physical training, or that learning efficacy will be higher directly after training. And even that some moderate physical activity will be really relevant to maintaining the gray matter volume in the brain, especially even in those areas that are responsible for executive functions and memory. So, and many of you know this, that the physical exercise is usually one of the most, you know, successful interventions anyway in the clinic. And that's also why it works really well to say, you know, they do just the same type of physical exercise, and, you know, we can basically leave the whole system in place as it is. And it's just that for them, it's so much more fun and engaging, and they want to do it more often through this musical feedback that's, you know, available with these machines. And so in our lab, we've seen that one of the key mechanisms of how this works, and I think this is something that's, it is for neurology absolutely essential to understand this. And I know that this is usually not, it's not taught in all the courses. It's just, you know, some universities, they have people who are interested in this, and it was thought that this was this little nerd community who's actually interested in this, but it's something super relevant, and it's emotional motor control. And I will explain this to some detail, because I think this is really very, very important to understand how these types of interventions that engage people strongly, they lead to a different results than those that don't engage people strongly and emotionally. And so first, what we do at my lab is that we look at how this emotional involvement, and we like to use music feedback for this, where people can play music, but how this will compensate for a loss of this voluntary motor control, for example, after neurodegeneration or stroke. So this voluntary motor control is great, because, you know, we can take something, we can manipulate it, we can decide to put it back, and, you know, we can all do this intentionally, volitionally. But for example, when I talk to you, some aspects of my speech is controlled through this voluntary motor control, and others is not. Others is through emotional motor control. For example, the prosody, you know, the speech melody, I don't have to think about it. This just happens. And if you talk to someone, that just happens. That happens even after, you know, some drinks in a bar. And it seems to happen automatically, but it's not at all a trivial task. If you try to do this with, if you try to emulate this with voluntary motor control, for example, in a speaker studio, and you try to fake it as if you were talking to someone, that's not a simple task. That's you hear this in the recording, you think, oh, that sounds really fake. And why is that? Because it's an additional resource, this emotional motor control, that can only be involved in an authentic situation when you are, for example, communicating with someone else. And this is very, very relevant, and you'll see in the following experiments. So we also think that we can maximize the physical functioning when engaging in physically strenuous tasks. So the first one was, we think we can compensate, for example, if voluntary motor control is broken after a stroke. So I have to explain something. So these two systems, the emotional motor control is also responsible for all our arousal functions. And so after a stroke, you usually find that patients, they have a deficit in their voluntary motor control. And the real bad reason for this is if you have it in the emotional motor control, you're dead. Yeah. So because this is so too drastic, yeah, PAG or so in the brainstem, that's hard to survive. But now the idea is many of the muscles, they can be reached by both motor control system, and that's why we think we can compensate some motor control through this stimulation of emotional motor control with, for example, music feedback. I'll show you in more detail in 2 minutes. So we also think that this helps to maximize physical functioning, and we have done these experiments with swimmers actually, where we see, oh, they swim faster round times because their body physiology is more efficient. And we think this, if you manage to integrate the workings of these both motor systems, the emotional and the voluntary motor control, very well, then the body can become more efficient, just functioning with respect to the motor properties. And I'll also talk about this briefly when I show you some results, because it seems muscles, they can become more efficient, or in other words, more relaxed. And this can have, after this musical feedback paradigms, and we think this can have some very, very positive effects also for patients suffering from any type of, you know, cramps. So also we think that one of the good things for this in psychological terms is, and this is something that Lydia has also been dealing with, is that it allows, through this basically musical ritual, to it allows people to experience these emotional experiences that they have with the music, and they're controlling the music. And when it becomes sad, they feel more sad. When it becomes happy, they feel more happy, because also they can control it. But that it allows them to experience those in a very defined and safe scenario. And this is also very, very positive for patients who suffer from anxiety. And this is something we repeatedly experience, is that anxiety levels, they go down. Then we also find that this enhances, this music feedback activity enhances aspects of cognitive processing. And one of the reasons for why I think this is the case is that our motor system, for every one of us, it is the system that determines the temporal procedures that are happening in our body. And our brain also uses this because it helps it to define temporal procedures going on in the brain, because these representations of motor acts, they can also be used to determine different types of sequences, such as thoughts, for example. And no wonder it would then influence cognitive processing. So I told you about this voluntary and emotional motor control. This is actually a bit of a longer and interesting story. And actually, there was this guy, Duchenne, and he's really well known for the so-called Duchenne smile. And the Duchenne smile is the real smile where, other than during a voluntary smile where you try to do it, you would have additionally the outer lower eye ring muscles that switch on. And this will only make it an authentic smile that no one can fake, because these outer lower eye ring muscles are under exclusive control of the emotional motor system. And he was the first who realized this, and he did electric stimulations of the muscles in the face. And he realized that if he asked people to do a certain, for example, to do a smile, they could not do it only if, additional to this corrugator muscles, you'd have stimulation of the outer lower eye ring muscles. And Paul Ekman, he's also very well known for his work on mimicry. He's one of the most important researchers on mimicry. He also realized this. He was interested in these universals of mimicry, and he realized that this was a really profound insight on what's actually happening during emotion that's activating the motor system in a totally different way, in a categorically different way. And so here again, a depiction of these real and fake smiles, where you'd have these outer lower eye ring muscles, and there's a precise anatomical description of how this works. And here we have the case as described by Gerd Holzdeger, with whom we are actually still working very closely together. He's still alive, and he did these neuroanatomical tracer studies where he investigated the precise anatomy of this emotional motor control system. And this is a patient, when asked, please show us all your teeth, she cannot do it on the right side because of a stroke in the other hemisphere in the motor tract. But during a genuine smile in a funny situation, she's capable of activating this corrugator muscle. And this leads also to a very, very important point, is that the emotional motor control and the volitional motor control, although they partially, use their own resources, like this outer lower eye ring muscle, and the emotional motor control is certainly, for all these control of dynamical movements of the body, super specialized and a high performance system. Else you couldn't do these larynx movements that have to, during prosody, control very, very precisely and fast. But also, to a large degree, they have access to the same muscles, like the corrugator that you use during a real smile and during a fake smile. But what happens, and we think that this is absolutely pivotal to understand the development of a lot of illnesses, is that if they have access to partly the same motor resources and there's a conflict between these two systems, that will actually lead and increase the severity of a number of illnesses. And we have also been working at describing these and have this at a journal in submission. So we think this is absolutely relevant to understanding the development of very grave illnesses also. And a lot about this is a conflict in motor control between voluntary and emotional motor control, and music feedback can help to bring these two systems to better work together, we think. And so here just a little impression of how this emotional motor control is organized, and that this relates to both level settings, so how high or low arousal is, but then also to a whole range of body functions, and of course breathing and micturition. They all also correspond very, very heavily to this system. And it's not only happening in the face or during breathing, but it's actually happening. It has access to the whole body, to the whole body musculature. And so, I mean, also in the legs, I want to say, yeah, of course, there's some that may be exclusive to one system or the other system, but the whole body is under influence of emotional motor control. And so it can have an influence when people are actually trying to do the cycling on the music Tigo. And this is this example, what I already said about the voice. And you can see it's a bit of a complex model that comes out if you do these tracer studies and you have a look, okay, where does these tracer go actually from this brain region to the next brain region, and what's the system of brain anatomy underlying these two systems, the emotional motor system and the voluntary motor system, and how do they integrate to achieve certain motor functions, and also that relate to cognitive functionality. And this is one of the aspects that we have recently been describing, is that this arousal system has probably to be considered part of this emotional motor control. But this is also very, very interesting, because what you often see is, for example, when people have these laughing interventions in India, and at some point they start to really laugh. Why is that? Because it increases their body physiology and arousal, and if they do it right, they will misinterpret basically as a real laugh, and then they really start laughing, because this body activity, and here when it comes through voluntary motor control, it's rather we think this is rather not as specific as when it comes through emotional motor control, which is why, of course, you can have like formally the same arousal levels by just doing sports, but when being very, very happy or being very, very angry, this in physiological terms can be much more specific and still at the same arousal level. So let's dive into these facts. So what we observe after 10 minutes of this music feedback training is an enhanced mood, like a runner's high, but patients or participants who do this, they are not training for half a year before, like someone who's, for example, wants to really experience a runner's high during running. They have to train, in average for half a year, and then run for half an hour until they have this experience. When you combine this physical exertion with a music feedback, it seems that this is much more efficient at creating this difference on the participants' moods. And we also see one very interesting thing, that is, this is some details of the experiment, but I want to share it with you because it's really relevant. So this is when you first do the control condition, and the control condition is you do exactly the same, you hear exactly the same type of music, but you cannot control the music with what you're doing. So, you can pedal, but the music is not changing. It's not a soundtrack to what you do. And if it's not a soundtrack to what you do, you have a little increase in mood. And if you then do the condition where you do the Jimin and you create your own soundtrack, you observe quite a massive change in mood, so an increase in mood. So that's driving it. But if you first do the music feedback intervention and then half an hour you do the control intervention, it's the case that during the music feedback intervention, the mood goes up, and then no matter what, half an hour, it's still up. And that's quite interesting also, because we think that this intervention can be really effective at combining it with other interventions, for example, hand motor training with robotics or etc. afterwards. Yeah. So this, and what we have derived from this is, it seems that hormones for this types of effect, they may play a really important role, and they may still be available half an hour afterwards. And what also goes along with this, and that was actually quite a high publication for those who are interested in academy, is that if you have these two conditions, one, you do this activity and you listen only passively to the music, and you have the other activity where you create the soundtrack, while in both conditions, it seems to be the same amount of force that people use. So this is not significantly different from one in the ratio of, so there's no direct music feedback, and there's a direct music feedback of what you do. But if you look at how exhausting participants felt this was, it turns out that when you control the music with this, you perceive it during the same amount of energy you invest as approximately half as exhausting. And this is after 6 minutes. So it's a very fast effect. And I mean, for the patients, of course, it's great, because they usually suffer a lot from feeling a great exertion doing this. And if they feel half as exerted as usual, you can imagine they are much more ready to go with this type of intervention. But what's also very interesting to see, and this also a significant effect. And here we looked at oxygen consumption, and we measured this with spirometry in some part of the experiment, which was very controlled, the types of movement they were doing, etc. And we realized if they are controlling the music with it, they have to use less oxygen for the same amount of weight shifting. And this can only mean the muscle was more efficient, or in other words, more relaxed. And this is, of course, for people suffering from, spasms, potentially highly relevant. So here a study with seniors with the average age of 70 and who were doing this, and we showed an increased endurance in these participants who were doing an all-out exercise, so until they absolutely could do no more. And we found that when they could do the music feedback with this, they would do each for an average 6.5 minutes instead of 5 minutes. We found a decrease in perceiving acute pain. So this was tested with a cold pressor task, where they put their hand and arm in 1 degree cold water after an intervention. And we found when they were doing their own soundtrack, instead of only listening to the music, they would leave their hand and arm longer in the water. And this, of course, pain, this relates to the work of Lydia, and I want to give over to you, Lydia, now.
Yeah, also hello everybody from my side. I also would like to show some experiments we did on patients with chronic pain with music feedback. And first of all, I would like to here show a little overview what are actually the factors that are most important in the chronification process of pain. And here you see results from a meta-analysis from the year 2000, which shows that psychosocial factors have a stronger influence on physical disability as a result, for example, of chronic back pain as compared to other factors of the biomedical or biomechanical area. And here, interestingly, these factors include cognitive ones, like, for example, fear avoidance beliefs, which are often displayed by patients with chronic pain, of course, because movements are painful. They develop also already the expectancy that if they engage in activity, that they will experience pain. But also emotional factors play into it, into the process of chronification of pain, like depression, anxiety, or also stress. I can't go further yet in the slides. I don't know if Tom still has the control. Okay, and what I was most interested in when it comes to musical interventions and pain is the role of anxiety. And anxiety plays a really crucial role in the development of chronic pain. There are studies which showed that it's even more important than the intensity of the pain perception itself. And also, anxiety per se lowers the pain threshold, and it also increases the attention to the pain patients are experiencing. And furthermore, also, like now in the part so far of the presentation, you've seen the different also motor systems, and of course, anxiety does something with the emotional motor system. But also with like a lot of muscle groups, I think, as everybody has experienced themselves in a stressful or anxious situation, it creates tightness and constriction. And in patients who have pain and anxiety, this can be very hurtful. And this is was now like the little theoretical background for the factors that play into a chronification of pain. And now here I just have like from one European guidelines what they say what is good in the management of chronic back pain. And here I would just briefly like to emphasize that it's highly recommended as first-line treatment, the exercise therapy in the management of chronic back pain, but also for other chronic pain conditions. And I think then there's no question why, for example, all rehabilitation sports that is integrated can be useful, but also we have to see then how our patients can be motivated to do exercise, even though it's hurtful or they are afraid of doing it. This is displayed here in the figure, the anxiety loop of pain. And yeah, you can see how already before a patient would go into doing exercise, for example, during their rehabilitation stay, they anticipate already pain. And this itself can create, for example, muscle tension. And indeed, both anxiety, the physiological and muscular changes due to anxiety could then actually create a stronger sensation of pain. And this then again leads, of course, to anticipation of pain before I go into exercise, or directly to avoidance behavior. So all physical activities, not only sports, but maybe also like visiting somebody because you have to walk there, will be avoided. And the idea of our studies with patients who suffer from chronic pain was that the music feedback intervention gymming could act actually on anxiety, and this would benefit this process here, because it could change the anxiety in this both positions. So one time before I go into the into doing sports, because the music feedback is immediate. So even from the first seconds on, the music can help to regulate anxiety, but also then during the performance. So if I continue exercising, something happens with the anxiety, or we were interested in if something is happening. And then maybe also the next time I go into doing the same sports with the music feedback, I even don't anticipate that my pain gets stronger. But this was a question, so this is the rationale behind. And now during the next minutes, I would like to show you the results of the study. So first of all, to the patient groups we were looking at, 23 patients were included in the study, and they had very different and diverse chronic pain conditions. So there were no selection made based on the chronic pain condition they experienced. Patients of course, could decide themselves if they want to participate in the study or not. And the therapist in the rehabilitation center where we conducted the study, it was a rehabilitation center for stress-related disorders, the therapist could recommend to participate in the study for certain patients. So this was the basic on which they were selected to do the intervention. And here you can see the baseline pain levels just to get an impression, because it's so widespread chronic pain conditions now. But here you can see that 7 of the patients had experienced mild pain before they started the interventional study, and 6 of them moderate, and the other 10 experienced severe pain. And the setup was, again, as Tom described before, so we stick to the same experimental setup because it's very well controlled. So all of the chronic pain participants where perform both conditions, the experimental condition with the music feedback and the conventional workout, where they used exactly the same fitness machines and listened to very similar music, but without that they could control actually the music. And the order of if they perform first the active or the passive music condition was balanced, so that we could control here for no effects of the order. And you can see these are now the anxiety levels, and it's a little difficult to read these figures. It's because of the statistics that we used, but this is the difference scores. So it means if the score is higher, it actually means less anxiety. So if you have on the anxiety questionnaire, we use STAX, the STAI, State and Trait Anxiety Inventory from Spielberger. And if you have their number, for example, before the intervention on 20, and then afterward it goes down to 15, then you would have a difference of 5. And this is actually better than if you had before 20 and then afterwards 25, you get the -5, and this would show that your anxiety goes up. So here, meaning this higher level after the gymming intervention shows that the anxiety decreased significantly, as you can see here, with a medium effect size. And in the next step, we were interested in, okay, but now what does it mean for the pain? Because we didn't observe the effect on the pain perception. So the pain stayed the same, even though the anxiety after a one-time music feedback intervention decreased significantly, there were no changes in pain. So we took a closer look, because actually the patients were divided, as you can see here in the descriptive statistics, by their baseline anxiety levels. So there were a group of patients, the majority of 14, who had very high anxiety levels. And there were 8 patients who at baseline had a medium anxiety. And we then looked at the descriptive statistics if there's actually a difference in the pain level. And this here are now significant results, but we think they're important to present for future research, but also to understand a little better which patient would most benefit from the music feedback. Because you can see that the one with the high anxiety, they're having the control over the music actually decreased their pain level, so from 6.8 to 4.5, and also a decrease could be seen, but not as strong during the convention, after the conventional workout. while patients with medium anxiety, here their pain level got up and even higher due to the conventional workout condition. And this we think is relevant to study in future, to get a better understanding in future studies, so that you can select which patients will benefit most from the music feedback. Yeah. And then we found some other interesting effects I would like to present briefly. So, for example, the motivation that was created through others, because here in the experiment, always 3 participants performed together on 3 different fitness machines and created a music piece together. And this motivation through others was significantly higher during the workout with music feedback, so the gymming. And this was also a medium effect, which we think is very relevant, because if people are more motivated and also motivated by other patients during workout together, this would also change the likelihood to engage in exercise the next time again. And here are some correlations which are interesting, because people, or the participants, when they create the music themselves in the music feedback conditions, and they actually like the music more. And this correlates with a number of other interesting factors. For example, with their generalized self-efficacy, something that is therapeutically also very relevant. But also, for example, with how much they thought that gymming, so the exercising with music feedback, would benefit to exercise even though they experience pain. So these were all correlations we found during the music feedback intervention, but not during the conventional workout. So these are also the motivational parts that played here into. Yeah. And that's the part I'd like to present it. So I will hand over to Tom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lydia. So I want to show some additional data that may be relevant to some of you out there. So, for example, we had this intervention with in drug abuse rehabilitation. So people heavily affected, poly drug addicts. 2/3 of them were doing this rehabilitation as parts of their prison sentence. So very high aggressivity levels, and but this intervention with the music feedback, they really liked this, and it was the only times that we actually saw someone smile during these interventions. So it was in this stay in this rehabilitation facility, the only time people were smiling was during the music feedback intervention, and we saw that this massively increased their self-efficacy experience, such that they would have this transfer that from their music feedback experience, they would have this transfer to thinking, okay, I can be successful with my rehabilitation. I have to switch to the next slide. I'm not sure it works. As Lydia, can you try? Yeah. So this was actually pertained when they listened 1 week later even to recordings of these music sessions that they did with others, and we found that this actually social component, you know, how much they perceived their training partners as likable or interesting, etc., that when listening to it, that would have an influence on their mood and their how much they experience self-efficacy, etc. So that this would actually still involve their social capacities, you know, in such a positive way. That was a surprise for many. What we always find is the so-called positivity bias, that when people do the music, change the music themselves, when it's a soundtrack and you control it yourself, they much more like it in aesthetic terms than when they listen to exactly the same type of music passively. which is of course great, because then patients who are maybe not accustomed to a certain musical style, they will still be very much able to enjoy this. This shows work with stroke patients, where we found that, so in this pilot study, not only was the aesthetic appreciation and the motivation greater, but also here 11 of the 12 participants, they showed better results in the action research arm tests, which really more corresponds to what can change for them in their daily lives. But we also did this with stroke survivors 2 years after their stroke, and we here in this pilot looked at their cognitive capabilities, and we found differences then after the music feedback with respect to working memory capacity. And that, although their actual strokes, they were totally different from each other, so very heterogeneous. And still, because we found these effects, we think this is more, an effect of the emotional motor control system. And this is one of the most recent publications by Strong et al. It just came out 2 weeks ago in Brain Sciences with Alzheimer's patients, where we found that if these Alzheimer patients, they have a 5-day training where they do it every day for 8 minutes, I think. Then on the 6th day, when they had a music training, we found better cognitive capacities with respect to short-term memory. And we think this is more generally a vitalizing effect. But that was not found when people were doing the same gymnastics, but where they did not control their own music soundtrack. So that's the end of our talk. So thank you very much for your attention, and we're very curious if you have 1 question, or 2 if you may be interested in doing research together, because if you want to do that, you get the Max Planck research team with this on board, and we'd be interested in doing this with you together. If you have ideas for research, please be very welcome to address us.
Great, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Lydia. I think it was a really interesting presentation from my point of view. And yes, we received a lot of questions, Tom and Lydia. So I don't think we can cover all the questions in our discussion right now, but I will simply start with 1 question, or actually it's a combination of 2 questions, because I would like to ask Tom both questions in one loop. The first part of the question is, do we work with music therapists? And the second question would be, how do we create the music for Jimin and THERA-music, of course, as well? I think you're the right person to answer that.
Yeah, so it is possible to create your own music. So that's actually part of how this technology was created, is that you can actually, we have a very specific way of how we modify the music. Also technically, there's like a patents involved and everything, because no one's ever thought this through, maybe in this type of detail, how you can manipulate music one-dimensionally. So that's possible. And what was the beginning of the question?
Whether we work with music therapists or not.
It can absolutely be music therapists. Of course, it can also happen during ergotherapy, because that's really a multi. I mean, especially with these devices, the music TiVo devices, because they're so easy to use. Many patients, they just use it themselves. They can sit down there and just start it themselves. But I also know of clinics who said, hey, it's great, we can, do all this sports training now with music therapists. That's great. But yeah.
Cool, thank you. Let's directly switch to the second question. That's how strong a client or a patient must be from a cognitive point of view to be able to to use the THERA-music device or the Jimin devices as well. So I don't know whether you, Tom, or you, Lydia, would like to answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, I already said we have these experiences with Alzheimer's patients.
Yeah.
You know, where our first concern was, oh, if it's difficult for the therapists because they usually have to concurrently engage people, but they really liked the intervention because for them it was they gave this musical device to the patients. They had them training in couples, and then they, you know, patients were just doing this for a quarter of an hour and not asking any questions. You know, they were just engaged, and therapists actually had a chance to go and have a coffee during that time. So that was really a big success. Also, with these minimal consciousness patients, where in some of these they respond really very strongly to this. So yeah, it seems that a lot of this is happening at a very intuitive level, actually. But my answer, I don't know what you think, Lydia.
Yeah, it's the same. I think the studies also with the stroke patient or Alzheimer are all good examples that, like from cognitive functioning, they don't need a lot of it and still understand what to do. It's very intuitive.
It's surprising that this can be so engaging for the patients, actually, because, for example, with this minimal consciousness patients, we had brain scans of these patients that showed a severe deterioration of their brain in the last 6 weeks, and they were still, you know, doing it for 10 minutes and the hand, and then we switched it to the foot and we're continuing with the foot doing this. So it's one of the things that inspire me to do this music research, because I see these types of phenomena.
Yeah. Then there is another question that I can directly answer. It's whether the THERA-music system can be evaluated in clinical practice and whether a demo is possible. And I can answer both questions with a yes, a demo is possible. The first month of a THERA-music license is for free. So you can simply visit the thera-music.com landing page of THERA-music. And yes, we can evaluate in clinical practice as well. Simply contact us from THERA-Trainer and we can talk about the possibilities in detail. Then I would say let's add one last question and we can answer all the other questions when we upload the webinar on YouTube and simply in the comments of the YouTube video. At first, a compliment to Tom and Lydia, amazing revolutionary scientific research. So that's what's in the comments here. And the question is, what does the future hold for music feedback in rehabilitation and how can we integrate it to clinical practice? So a very open question. Maybe you can answer it in a few short sentences.
Lydia, do you want to have a first go, because you have so much clinical experience also?
Yeah, I think it like music feedback will play a huge role in rehabilitation in future also, because I think like this technology like offers an easy way to use it for patients, right? I mean, there are also especially like in the pain research, there are so many situations like in rehabilitation clinic also where you experience acute pain, where it would be so crucial that people have a music feedback device already. And I mean, from therapeutic point of view, from the behavioral therapy, it's so good because you don't have this negative conditional process where you like experience pain or unpleasantness with your body, and then you start to think that always if I do this movement I will experience pain. But I think really the music can intervene very early, that you can have a pleasant and aesthetic moment with the same movement, and even so you have pain at the same time. So I think also for this very relevant in rehabilitation.
Yeah, so I can only second that. Yeah, I think it's also not only for the use in the clinic, but think about, I mean, for example, already this THERA-Trainer patients can then, you know, after their clinic stay, they can further use it at home. And you know, think about what that could mean in terms of how a Nachversorgung, we say in Germany, could be happening. And I think that this in future will play probably an increasingly important role. Yeah.
I would completely agree here with you, Tom. All right. As I said, I would suggest that we answer all the other questions in the comments of our YouTube upload. I hope you all enjoyed our webinar. Tom, Lydia, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for attending to our webinar and presenting. I wish you a great day and see you soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And please do write an email if you're interested in doing research. Maybe you can also, I don't know if my email address is visible somewhere or was visible somewhere, but you'll find it over the internet, I'm sure.
Great.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.